Everyone, it's Miss Fogarty. Today we are reading Lesson 9 of Listening and Learning, Celebrating Those Who Fought for a Cause. Today is a wrap-up of all of the people we've learned about. As you can see, all of our fabulous friends are in front of us on the screen. When we're reading today, there are going to be a couple of vocab words we're going to focus on. The first one is the word democratic. That's based on a form of government that includes giving people the right to vote for their leaders. So we are a democratic nation, meaning that we're allowed to vote for who we want to be in charge of us. The second vocab word is dignity. That's a sense of respect and honor. So we should treat people with dignity and respect. We should give people respect and honor. The next vocab word is obstacles. Obstacles are people or things that stand in the way of forward movement or hold up progress. So if something is in your way when you're trying to do something, it's an obstacle. And the last vocab word is taxes. Taxes is money raised by governments to help pay for important things. We pay taxes, or taxes get taken out of your mom and dad's and Miss Fogarty's paycheck every week, and that gets put aside, and the government uses it for things such as construction, paving the roads, money for schools, things like that. So it's money that the government takes and uses for important things for people. Again, our vocab words are democratic, dignity, obstacles, and taxes. Like I said, today's lesson is going to be a recap of all the amazing people we've learned that have fought for a cause. I want you guys to listen carefully and think back and remember all of the people that we've learned about over the course of this domain. You have listened to stories of 7 extraordinary or amazing people who dedicated their lives to making sure that all Americans have equal rights. These great Americans were able to bring about changes that resulted in new, fair ways of life. They were able to do this because the United States, and since its creation, has had a democratic form of government. This means that citizens of the United States, or people, are involved in the political process. Us people can vote for political leaders who represent our interests and our needs. It took a while for every American adult to gain the right to vote, but eventually it did happen. Now, each person has an equal say in deciding what kind of government they want. In order to vote in the United States, a person must be 18 years of age and be a United States citizen. That means he or she must have been born in the United States, have parents who are American citizens, or have been given citizenship. People who are granted citizenship are called naturalized citizens. Naturalized citizens are people who were born in another country but have chosen to become citizens of the United States. We talked a lot about that during our immigration unit. Every 2 years and every 4 years, important elections are held. People go to places called polls to vote. As you have learned, the right to vote is called suffrage. Voters can decide who should lead their state and who should lead the nation. They can help decide if taxes or money should be raised by the government to pay for important things communities need, such as schools, libraries, hospitals, or whether taxes should be reduced so that people have a little more money to spend. These are important choices that affect all Americans. Suffrage, or voting, is a way of making sure that the government is following the wishes of the people that it serves. Today, we take for granted that adult American citizens have the right to vote. We hardly even think about it at all. But you have heard about a journey that people long ago went on to make this a reality. You have also heard about obstacles that were placed in their path along the way. Now let's review the lives of the brave people you've just learned about. This fabulous lady is Miss Susan B. Anthony trying to vote. What is Susan B. Anthony famous for? Susan B. Anthony worked to expand women's rights in America, especially the right to vote. A woman must not depend upon the protection of a man, but must be taught to protect herself, she once said. Susan was a famous leader of the women's rights movement. Sadly, Susan did not live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution in 1920, which made it legal for women to vote. Without Susan's efforts, however, the battle for women's rights might have gone on for much longer. So Susan earned women the right to vote through all of her hard work and dedication. Before her, women's votes were not counted, so they didn't get to choose who led them. This is an Eleanor Roosevelt stamp. Eleanor Roosevelt worked to improve the civil rights and human rights of many groups of people in the United States. During the Great Depression, Eleanor worked tirelessly to help those most in need. Eleanor believed that all people should be treated fairly, equally, and with respect. Later in her life, Eleanor worked for the United Nations. She took her message of freedom and equality all over the world. So Miss Eleanor Roosevelt was married to a president. She was the first lady. She had um, a very high platform, meaning that she had a lot of people looking at her because she was married to a president, and she used that for good. She decided to fight for people who didn't have a lot of money, people who lived in poverty, people that had disabilities. So she stood up and used her platform as the first lady to get a lot of people a lot of important rights. This is Mary teaching. Mary McLeod Bethune worked to create educational opportunities for African Americans, especially girls, during a time of segregation. Mary opened a school that eventually became a 4-year college, and she helped many African American men gain the skills they needed to be able to vote. Mary worked closely with Eleanor Roosevelt and a talented team of African American advisors to improve opportunities for all Americans. So Mary was a teacher, and she said, it's not fair that African Americans don't have the same opportunities that white people have. You know, they come to school, they don't have good supplies, they don't have enough desks, especially girls. And she decided to change that. No, I'm going to teach African Americans. I'm going to do my best to provide them with an education so they have the same opportunities as everyone. This is Mr. Jackie Robinson. It is said that Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. He became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. When Branch Rickey, the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, invited Jackie to play for his team, they both knew that they were attempting to change people's attitudes and end discrimination in American sports. In 1947, when Jackie played his first Major League game at Ebbets Field, he proved that not only was he an incredible baseball player, he was a man who had great courage. Jackie made the world a better place. At the end of his first season with the Brooklyn Dodgers, he was chosen to be the Rookie of the Year, and baseball was finally integrated so people of any race or color could play together on one team. Miss Rosa Parks sitting on a bus. On that cold December night in 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat, the world changed. Rosa's actions led the Montgomery bus boycott. The power of so many people coming together to end unfair laws ultimately led to the end of legal segregation in the South. Today, many people feel that the civil rights movement really began in the moment that Rosa said, "No, I'm not getting up." That is why Rosa is called the mother of the civil rights movement. So her refusal or her courage to stand up and say, "Nope, I'm not moving. I can sit wherever I'd like," and the bravery she demonstrated really got the ball rolling in terms of rights for African Americans and ending segregation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the peaceful leader of the civil rights movement. He led the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. Martin promoted change and the achievement of equal rights through nonviolence. Remember, he didn't use weapons. He didn't use fists to fight. He used speeches. He used marches, peaceful protesting. Martin's powerful speeches changed people's hearts and their minds. He led the way to change laws that were 100 years old, allowing African Americans to fully participate in American society. As a nation, we honor Martin's work each year on the third Monday of the month in January. We have Martin Luther King Day off in January every single year for school because we're honoring what this man did to better the lives of African Americans and everyone else. Cesar Chavez was once a migrant worker. Members of his family were migrant workers too. During his years as a migrant worker, he became very aware of how hard life could be for people without protection or rights. Migrant workers worked extremely long hours for very little pay. They lived in overcrowded camps. Migrant workers couldn't even afford health care. Cesar vowed to change all of this. He dedicated his whole entire life to making sure that farm workers, including migrant workers, had basic rights. Cesar brought people together and created a labor union called the National Farm Workers Association. Eventually, through his efforts, Cesar succeeded in getting better pay and working conditions for all migrant workers. Without his determined leadership, these things might have never have happened. Today, there are many people who work to make sure everyone in the United States is treated fairly and that their rights are protected. Just as one example, it is important that people who have disabilities and who are challenged either physically or mentally are treated equally too. People with disabilities might have trouble seeing, hearing, or walking. They might need to use wheelchairs, walkers, hearing aids, or they might need a service dog. They may have special devices needed to help talk on a telephone, or they may use service dogs to guide them on sidewalks or onto buildings. So in this picture, you can see a little boy who is wheelchair bound, meaning he can't walk. So he deserves the same rights that you and I have. So there are people working every single day to make sure that we don't discriminate against people with disabilities. This is former President George H.W. Bush. On July 26, 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed a new law called the Americans with Disabilities Act. This law gives protection to people with disabilities. For one thing, this law states that all people should be allowed easier access to places that everyone enjoys going, such as restaurants, movie theaters, libraries, and other buildings and public places. The law also states that public transportation, such as trains and buses, must have paths and entries so it's easy to manage, and there's ramps, lifts, and elevators. This law also helps to those who have diseases that are not curable and diseases that make it hard for people to take care of themselves. So George H.W. Bush, one of our former presidents, signed a law that made it so people with disabilities have the same rights. Buses have to have a way for people in a wheelchair to get on them. It's not fair if they didn't. People should be able to ride a bus whether they have a disability or not. So he made it a law that you have to be able to be accommodated. If you go to the mall or if you go to a public place, there should be a handicap button. That way, if you're in a wheelchair and you can't get out of it to open your own door, all you have to do is press a button and the door is open for you. So accommodations like that were made possible so that people with disabilities have the same rights and can go the same places that you and I can. And so you see, it's important that we stand up and recognize when people are being treated unfairly. We have just one world that we all share together. No person, because of the color of their skin, cultural group, religious group, should ever be treated unfairly. We have a responsibility to treat all human beings with dignity and respect. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. So again, standing up for what you believe in is very important. All these people did that. And because of them, we're able to live in a world where everyone has the same rights. If they said, you know what, I'm afraid to stand up, or I'm going to be bullied if I stand up, if they thought about that and decided to not have the courage that they had, our lives today would be extremely different.